After 6 solid weeks of being inundated with 80 IQ comments from lifelong dedicated anti Semites about this issue with the USS Liberty from back in the 60s, I thought I would take a moment and cover this because the vast majority of my audience is not 80 IQ. And I'm sure they are also being confronted with this blip in history, this very obscure event that happened back in the 60s that means nothing. Now, what happened? Back during the 60s, Israel was at war with these Arab nations trying to destroy it, like they have been trying to destroy Israel for a very long time. And there was a U.S. ship in the region that was mistaken for an Egyptian vessel, and Israeli aircraft engaged it. And it caused loss of life, and it caused a great deal of damage. And of course, conspiracy theories love to take little blips like this out of history and make them out to be much more than what they are. Some have said, "Oh, it wasn't an accident." It was an accident. It was fog of war. It was just one of those things that happened. And since that time, you see, they'll never tell you this part. They'll never tell you this part. Since that time, the Israelis issued a formal apology and have brought forth I think it's over $60 million in modern day money for the repair and restoration of the ship, for pain and suffering to those who lived through it, for restitution for those who lost their lives. See, they'll never tell you that part. They'll never tell you all of the good things, and it didn't put a dent in our relationship. These are the facts that the anti-Semites don't want you to know. But the funny thing is about that is they make themselves out to be these pseudo-historians, and they couldn't tell you one thing about the USS Philadelphia. You see, the USS Liberty was a blip in history. The issue with the USS Philadelphia changed history. The USS Philadelphia is the reason we even have a United States Navy. The USS Philadelphia is the reason, and it was the precedent for the U.S. being able to go to war without a formal declaration of war. This changed history, and I guarantee you'll never hear an anti-Semite bring it up. You'll never hear an Israelite, Jew hater bring it up because they don't know, because they only study the history that agrees with their hate. Now, we're going to cover this at length in today's video to show this, and to also to shame them, because they won't bring up the USS Liberty until a bunch of Muslims high on Middle Eastern meth called Captagon go into Israel in a sneak attack on civilians on a holiday and brutalize and rape and murder and kill thousands. They've got to figure out some way in their mind to still justify being on their side, and they are. And that's accurate. Real quick, thank you, all of you who have joined us over the Patreon channel, where it's only $1 per month. That's it. Even less if you sign up for an entire year, fully refundable. First 90 days, no questions asked. Partnering with Vimeo over there, we can kind of take the gloves off, and we can tell the truth in a way without having to worry about the censors here. That's what I spend most of my time doing, making videos. It's not the ideas for the videos and what needs to be said. It's doing the dance in a way that gets through the censors. Over there, we don't have to worry about it. Hundreds of videos never before seen. Never before seen here on YouTube. Over there, there's a $5 level. The most recent video over there is for the $5 level. I think there's 5 or 6 at that level, but there's hundreds over there at the $1 level. So would love to have you over there. Could sure use the support these days because it is getting tougher by the day. God bless every one of you who already has. Thank you so much. You guys are making a huge, huge difference in my life. The reason the United States Navy even exists has directly to do with a ship called the USS Philadelphia. Without that issue, we may not even have one. Now, what are we talking about? Well, there were the group of people called the Barbary Pirates. They were Muslim pirates. How many of you ever heard the Marine Corps song, "From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli"? Tripoli was in Libya. And along the northern coast of Africa, there were countless raids that captured and enslaved Europeans. That's right. African Muslims and Middle Eastern Muslims captured and enslaved millions of white Europeans. And the ship ran aground, the USS Philadelphia, and it was when the captain surrendered, he had to dump all of the weapons and ammunition, but it was intolerable for the U.S. to even think of a U.S. ship being in the hands of the Barbary pirates, so they staged a raid. Navy Commander Stephen Decatur and 60 of his men dressed as Arabs and sneaked into Tripoli Harbor, where they set the Philadelphia on fire so that the Muslim pirates could not use it. In a second attack on the harbor, Decatur and his men fought like action heroes, capturing pirate ships and fighting bravely, eventually winning the release of the American prisoners. And if you'd like to hear the real story, here's the real story of the U.S. Navy. During the American Revolutionary War, the Barbary pirates attacked American merchant vessels in the Mediterranean. However, on December 20th, 1777, Sultan Mohammed III of Morocco issued a declaration recognizing America as an independent country and stating that American merchant ships, as opposed to British, could enjoy safe passage into the Mediterranean and along the coast. Now, pay attention there. See, Muslims are liars, and they break their deals. Muslims are liars, and they break their deals. Because of taqiyya, they're allowed to. The relations were formalized with the Moroccan-American Treaty of Friendship signed in 1786, which stands as the U.S.'s oldest non-brokered friendship treaty with a foreign power. Until the American Declaration of Independence in 1776, British treaties with the North African states protected American ships from the Barbary corsairs. Morocco, which in 1777 was the first independent nation to publicly recognize the United States, in 1784, became the first Barbary power to seize an American vessel after the nation achieved independence. The Barbary threat led directly to the United States founding the United States Navy in March 1794. While the United States did secure peace treaties with the Barbary states, it was obliged to pay tribute for protection from attack. The burden was substantial. From 1795, the annual tribute paid to the Regency of Algiers amounted to 20% of the U.S. federal government's annual expenditures. We had to bribe the Muslim terrorists not to attack our ships. We had to bribe them. And this one had been going on for a long time. It continues. Ireland, going back even farther than this, was subject to similar attack. June 1631, Murat Reis, with corsairs from Algiers and armed troops from the Ottoman Empire, stormed ashore at the little harbor village of Baltimore, County Cork. They captured almost all the villagers and took them away to a life of slavery in North Africa. The prisoners were destined for a variety of fates. Some lived out their days chained to the oars as galley slaves, while women spent long years as, well, you guessed it. You guessed it. And you want the real numbers? The real numbers? The raids were such a problem that coastal settlements were seldom undertaken in the 19th century. Between 1580 and 1680, corsairs were said to have captured about 850,000 people as slaves. From 1530 to 1780, it could have been as many as 1.25 million. And then either forced to convert or live life as slaves. And yes, the First Barbary War set the precedent that military force could be used even without a formal declaration of war. This is a great video from History Inside. The Forgotten Slave Trade, the White European Slaves of Islam. Those of you that got your nose all bent out of shape about Israel this, Israel that, liberty this, you're a bunch of morons who are just trading in pseudo-history. You see, this has been going on for a long time. Hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. Another great site out there called The Archaeologist covers this, Inside the Terrifying Truth of the Barbary Slave Trade. And you can read how this has been an ongoing problem, how America was extorted to the tune of 20% of our federal government's expenditures to bribe them to not. So I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear anything about the liberty. You're a bunch of morons. They need to crawl back under the rock you came from. This is the real story. This is the real story that's relevant now. That we have a Navy now, that we have aircraft carriers now, that we have all of these different assets to bring to bear now. Doesn't have anything to do with Israel. It has to do because in 1690 and 1770, there was no state of Israel. And yet the Muslims were still attacking European merchant vessels and taking slaves. And this is all history. And going after U.S. merchant ships. Just like they did, by the way. Wish I would have brought that up. The Houthi rebels. The Houthi rebels just grabbed a ship that was... The only connection it has to Israel is that there is an Israeli who is a part owner. It's not flagged in Israel. It's not ported in Israel. Nobody aboard is Israeli or Jew. But the Houthi rebels grabbed it because there's this one guy who's a part owner of it who is. But this is classic for them. The pirate life. I was going to bring up the images, but I probably wouldn't be able to get away with it here. I've found it fascinating and disturbing over the last so many years of how historically these groups of people that did these heinous things are being reinvented in Hollywood as these romantic heroes. One of the big ones that disturbed me was the Vikings. Anybody who understands anything about what the Vikings were and who the Vikings were wouldn't want your kid dressing as a Viking or watching shows about Vikings or anything like that. They were horrible. What the Vikings did to the north coast of Great Britain and England was absolutely awful. It was on par with the Barbary pirates. But this is, of course, not convenient for people to talk about, because it goes against a certain narrative, doesn't it? So every time you see or hear a comment where it says USS Philadelphia, just point them, the USS Liberty, bring up the USS Philadelphia and tell them the real story about who the real demons on the earth are and how they used to extort the U.S. government to not attack our ships, and how we finally had to put our foot down and throw them basically back into the Stone Age. Apparently we didn't do a good enough job. Hopefully we'll get it done this time. So I'll leave it there. God bless. Pray for each other. Pray for Israel. Pray for me. I'll pray for you. Lift each other up. God bless. Like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you guys next time.